Hey, it's Steve Lindsley. Welcome back to my shop. My friend Matt is a classmate in my pottery class. And a while back he asked me to make him a couple of coffee tables. Hold on a minute. Did I just say coffee tables? I mean, I've only been working on these things for months. And I get the first part of my video and I call my end tables coffee tables. I swear, I don't know what I was thinking. So obviously this is not a coffee table video. It's an end table video. Sorry about that. So I said, sure. What would you like? What style? So he shows me a picture, and it just so happens that it turned out to be an arts and craft or mission style, which is one of my two favorite types of furniture. One is the arts and crafts, obviously, and then the second one is shaker. So those are my two favorite furniture styles. So I agreed to make him a couple of tables. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I did that. Before I get to that, though, let me show you a photo of what the completed project looked like. So take a look at these. All right. So that's the finished product. It's going to take two videos, unfortunately, because by the time I edit stuff down, it just turns out to be like an hour-long video, and that's a bit much for YouTube. So I got a part one and a part two. So please, if you just want to skip to the end, and just go ahead and watch the part two video. So let's go ahead and get started making Matt's end tables. Here's the wood I bought for Matt's end tables. It's quartersawn white oak. I went to a dealer close to my house called Penn Hardwoods. Mission or arts and craft type furniture, in my opinion, is really only should be made out of one wood, and that's quartersawn white oak. That was what the original fathers of arts and craft, Gustav Stickley and others, used to make their furniture, and I really like using it when I'm making arts and craft pieces. It doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, the pieces don't look good in cherry or some other color, but I think, you know, with the quartersawn white oak, you get the medullary rays, which I put a little mineral spirits on that piece right there, so you can see that you can see the rays in the piece of wood there. I think it just I don't know, to me that's just the wood. It's just the wood you should use. So I got about 28 board feet, which is probably more than enough to finish these two tables. What I'm going to do next is I'll get my plan out and I'll start cutting the pieces to size. First thing I want to do is I'm going to have to glue up the legs, the top, and the shelf. So I'm going to get started on that and start putting this table together. Here's one of the legs for our table. What I did is I glued two pieces of the white oak together. I want the legs to be 1 3/4 squares, so the pieces weren't quite wide enough. So I had some scrap red oak, so I glued that in the middle. So what I have is on this face and this face, I got the quartersawn grain, but obviously on this face, it's pretty nasty looking. So what I can do is to get quartersawn on all four sides is I can take and glue a couple of strips on either side of that. This it's about 1 3/4 wide this way. It's less than that going this way. So when I add these two pieces to the outside, it'll give me a quartersawn grain all the way around on all four sides. So the pieces are cut a little wider than the legs, so I can have some to trim up. And then once I get it glued up and get the leg cut to proper length, I'll round this edge over a little bit with a round over bit, and then you'll never notice that piece is glued onto the side there. So That way I'll have a quarter sawn grain on all four sides. Okay, I got the legs all milled up. Got the pieces glued on the side, so we got nice quarter sawn grain on all four sides. They're not cut to length yet. I want the table to be 24 inches tall, so I'm going to wait till I get the top done and see how tall that is. It'll probably be 3/4 of an inch, but I'm just going to wait until I get the top glued up. I really like the quarter sawn oak. I'll put some mineral spirits on the piece and see if you can. Hopefully, it'll show up on the camera. But you get a nice reflect grain. This has just got a rough sander. Sanding. I run them through the drum sander to square them up. I generally use the drum sander to thickness most of my stock, unless I have a lot to take off. I find that it's a slower process, but you don't have to worry about grain direction or any of the other things where you would with a planer. So I use the drum sander. Here's some of the wood for the top. Top's going to be 20 inches wide, 24 inches long. I got 4 pieces here that I need to glue up. I did face joint one side, then I run it through the drum sander, got it down to, it's just it's a little 3/4 strong. It's just a little bit over 3/4, but it's the same. It's got some nice grain in it as well. Hopefully you can see that. Camera picks it up. I do have some trimming to do on it. I got some sapwood here I need to trim off. There's a couple of knots. Well, I don't mind the knots as part of the beauty of the wood, but these are nice tight knots, so you probably could leave them. But if they're loose knot, I try and cut them off. So anyway, the next thing to do is I'm going to let these legs sit until I get the top glued up and figure out what thickness it's going to be. And then I'll cut these to length. I'm not going to round over the edges until I do the mortises, so we'll do that like last. So all right, the next thing to do is get this top cut to size. The shelf's pretty much the same process, so I'm not going to show any of that. So it's pretty much the same thing. It's just a glue up. So we'll do that, and then we'll come back after we get all that done. Here's the 4 boards for our top. I trimmed each one of them down. If there's 4 boards, eventually the final width of each board would be 5 inches. So what I did was I made the 2 in the center 5 inches, and the outside ones are like 1/4 of an inch bigger, so I can trim a little bit off of it once I get everything all glued up. I jointed all the edges. I arranged the boards in a grain pattern that's I think is pleasing, and I put on a cabinet maker's triangle here to keep everything in orientation. Right now everything's just dry fit. I like to do a dry run on the glue up so that I get everything the way I like it. Get the clamps where they need to be. So should be a pretty easy glue up. I'm using this Titebond 3 Ultimate Wood Glue to glue for this project. One, it's a darker glue, so it goes well with the darker white oak. And 2, it's got a little bit longer open time than some of the other Titebond glues. So that's what we're using to glue this up. So now the deal is to take it apart and glue it up and let it dry for probably overnight before I do anything with it. Now that I know the thickness of the tabletop, I can go ahead and cut the table legs to length. I cut the legs so that the table was 24 inches tall. Okay, now that I have the legs cut to length, I need to lay them out of which ones I want in what position on the table. What I did was I took some denatured alcohol just on a paper towel and wiped it on to get an idea what the grain looked like. Now, I could have used mineral spirits, but it takes longer to dry. The denatured alcohol dries pretty fast, so I did that. So what I got is this is going to be the top, and these are going to be the 2 front legs, and I got them laid out in the way that I want them. So this will be the front. These 2 will be the back, and then of course this is the side. Just to make sure I keep everything in the way I want it, I'm going to put a cabinet maker's triangle on here. Basically, the point of the arrow points, or point of the triangle, this point, faces towards the front. So I'll always know which orientation the things are going to go back on. Now I need to mark where I want the mortises. So there's going to be a mortise between these two, between those two, and these two, and those two. So all on the inside, none on the outside. So what I need to do is just I'm just going to take a piece of chalk and I'm going to mark the inside, and I'll mark the inside of this one and this one. And since this is the inside, we'll do this and this and that and that. So now I have all the, so when I put it back together, I have all the mortises marked, what side the mortises go on. I'll be able to look and see which way the table should go together. So like I said, this is going to be the front, this will be the back, and that'll give me a nice grain pattern along the front part of the legs. Time to cut the mortises in our legs, and I'm going to use this hollow chisel mortiser. Got a 3/8 inch chisel in the machine. This is a Rikon. It does well for what I use it for. I'm not a production shop or whatever, so it's got a 1/2 horsepower motor. I guess one of the knocks on the machine is it's a little underpowered. The other knock is that the chisels that come with it are really bad, and for what I do, its size is fine. I will agree that the chisels are basically suck. I mean, the ones that come with it were really bad. This is one that it's a Delta one that I had from another machine, and I honed the sides of it so that it's nice and smooth. And every now and then I give it a blast of this little dry lube, which kind of helps the friction between the bit and the chisel. So I have my pieces laid out here. Probably can't see it, but there's the mortise there and there. This side is the waist side, so I'm going to put it in. I got a little spacer block I'll put between my my hold down. Get that nice and tight. This machine has a X and Y table. It goes this way, obviously, but it also goes back and forth this way. I have that locked because I have it set where I want. I'm not sure which one's X and which one's Y, but it really doesn't make any difference. This is the one that I want because I don't want the table to move in and out because I want to keep the same reveal on the outside. So I got a vacuum over here that I'm going to vacuum some of the chips away with once they because it generates a lot of chips. So I just line the things up by eye and make the cut. So here we go. I could try and plunge the full depth of the mortise, which is 13/16, but this oak is really hard. So what I do is I kind of give myself a little relief, and then it makes it a little bit easier to finish the cut. So I just go down this side, line it up by eye, go in a little ways. And then we'll just waste away the rest of it. All right, now plug your ears. This part's going to get noisy. Whoop. All right, now I'll just go back and make sure I get everything to full depth. Okay, and there's one. It still requires a little bit of work with a chisel. The corners are not clean because of the way the bit is, so I need to chisel them out. But that's how you drill a square mortise. Here's the stretchers and rails for our table. The next thing we need to do is cut some tenons on the end to fit in our the mortises that I cut in the legs earlier. These are the upper rails, 2 for the side, for the back. They're 4.5 inches wide. These are the lower stretchers, outside stretchers. They're 3 1/4, and these are the front and back stretchers, which are the 2 1/2. So they're all 1.5 inches longer than they need to be, because we're going to cut a 3/4 inch tenon on the end to fit in the mortise. So the next thing to do is go to the table saw and cut the shoulders for the tenons. And then I got a tenoning jig that I'll show that we're going to cut the tenons to size. So they're going to be 3/8 of an inch so that they fit into our 3/8 inch mortise. So we're off to the table saw to take care of that. Well, here I got the saw set up to cut the shoulders on the tenon, so it's just a matter of using a sacrificial fence and the miter gauge, and I'm just using a regular saw blade here to define the shoulders. Well, I reset the fence and raised the saw blade to cut the end of the tenons here so that they would fit in the mortises that I cut into the table legs. Well, there's numerous ways to cut the cheeks on the tenons. I could have used a dado blade, or I could have just used a regular saw blade, but I made this tenoning jig to give it a try on this project. It worked out pretty well. It's a homemade piece. There's plenty of plans on the internet for similar pieces as this. It actually worked out pretty well. Okay, I've spent the last few minutes with a chisel cleaning up the mortises. Well, they're pretty much good to go. There is a little bit of cleanup in the bottom of them. You can see maybe, if I can get it to focus here. The chisel has a little curved part at the bottom, and when you're drilling that out, that leaves a little spot down in the corner that needs to be cleaned up with a chisel. So it only takes a couple of minutes. You just clean it up, scrape it out, and you get a nice square mortise. The tenons, they almost fit, which is, I'd rather have them a little big than too loose. So they're a little too long on the width wise. So what I do is I just take a chisel and clean that top part up. I like that tenoning jig because it gives a nice flat surface on the cheek of the tenon. Makes for a nice glue up. Of course, I could have used a dado blade or regular saw blade and accomplished the same thing, but it would have required a little bit of cleanup. So that one worked pretty well. So this one is still a little bit long. It won't go into that. So if I clean it up with a chisel, this one's already been done. So if I clean it up a little bit, get the right way that it's supposed to go, I should get a nice slip fit there on that mortise and tenon, which is what I'm looking for. So I clean this last one up, and then we can do a little dry fit of this piece. Here's a piece just slightly loosely fit together. Everything looks like it's going to fit together nice. I haven't put any clamps or anything on it. Obviously, I'm missing some pieces here. There'll be a drawer in the front. So what I'm on, just got a couple of scraps here. So what we'll do is put one across the top there, and then down here somewhere, when I decide how big the drawer is going to be, I'll cut one, and we've got to put a couple of mortises in here, and then fit that in there. This part, the top piece, I'm going to have a dovetail on the end of it, and that'll go into a dovetail socket at the top there. So I got a little bit more work to do on the inside of these things with a couple of more mortises, and then cut that dovetail. mill up some pieces for the top and bottom of the drawer there. So that's what I'm going to do next. The piece still has a lot of work left to do on it. I got to cut some curves on the front and back piece. On the side here, I'm going to have some spindles that go top to bottom. So I need to cut some mortises for those and make sure that they're all lined up so everything fits right. So time to get the mortise machine back out and make a couple of those. Okay, we're moving along here. Okay, I've gone ahead and cut the tenons on the end of the rails that are on the bottom part of the drawer opening. They're 1 inch wide, 3/8 of an inch thick, and 3/4 of an inch long. We'll cut a mortise in the inside of the front legs to handle that. For the top part, I've laid out first thing I did was to waste away the back part of this dovetail. The piece is 3/4 of an inch, or 1/2 an inch thick, and I cut some shoulders on the piece, and then all I did was took a sliding bevel gauge and got to where I got to the corner of this piece, right, the part that I cut there, and then I just struck a line, and that's going to be my dovetail. If I can keep it focused here. So that's just the layout. Cutting it, you can either use a handsaw or I just took it over to the bandsaw and cut the piece out. So it's going to be let into the top part of the leg. So if you got the leg, it's going to be, this part's going to be let into there. So everyone's going to be individual. So if they're not all exactly the same, it's not really going to make that much difference. So I'm sure that was all as clear as mud. So let me go ahead and we'll lay out some of the dovetails on the end and figure out how we're going to get rid of the going into end grain on this white oak is not high on my list of things to do, but there's not much else we can do about it. So, all right, let me get all that laid out, and I'll show you how I cut those. Well, I cut the mortise for this front piece under the drawer. I just used the mortising machine. In this case, I locked the left to right movement of the machine, and I used a little knob there to move it front and back. I still don't know which one's X and Y, so it goes front and back, side to side as far as I'm concerned. So this one I'm using the front to back adjustment. Here's the one of the tables just fit together, dry fit. I got a couple of band clamps on it trying to just hold it together. Main purpose is just to check the joints, make sure everything is fitting tight, and I checked it for square and everything's okay there. This part here was the mortise I just cut on the mortising machine. I'm going to do a 3-inch drawer. It's kind of hard to see probably with that band there, but the drawer is going to be 3 inches tall. Fine if you put too big of a drawer. One, it would look kind of funny, and two, the deeper the drawer is, the more junk gets put into it, and then you can never find what you're looking for. So it's deep enough to hold the remote and any other thing you want in the, next to your chair, easy chair. So this, on the top here, you can see it, I let the dovetails in. I spent some time cutting a little socket there with a chisel. It's not my best chisel work, but the top will cover it, so you never really see it. And the purpose is to make that top nice and solid there, which it definitely does that. So, okay, well, the next thing to do is we're going to cut some mortises in these side pieces. I got some piece of scrap, I don't know what to do with it, but it's there's going to be some spindles go top to bottom, 1/2 inch square. They'll have a little tenon on them. They'll fit into some mortise. There'll be 7 of them, 1 centered, and then 3 on each side. So I need to get ready to cut those mortises while I still have the mortising machine out. Okay, it's time to take this one apart and get busy on those mortises. After looking at the table and the dry fit, this big empty space on the side here seemed kind of a waste. So what I decided to do is put some spindles in there. So there's 7 spindles on each side. What I did was I took the matching rail and stretcher and went to the hollow chisel mortise, and after some spending some time with the layout, I cut a 3/8 inch mortise in the rail and the stretcher, and then I made some 1/2 inch spindles to fit in the fit into the mortise. I had to put a tenon on the end, so the tenon is, I don't know, it's 3/16 inch long, and so it's 3/16 inch long, and the shoulders are 1/16 of an inch. So I cut those on there till I make sure that they actually fit, which they do. So I got this table, I got the pieces dry fit together. It wasn't difficult cutting the tenons. It was just time consuming. There's 7 spindles per side, 4 sides, that's 28. 2 extra, that's 30. 8 cuts on each spindle. And if my math is correct, that's 240 cuts on the, and I used the tenoning jig and the table saw to cut those. So it actually went fairly quick. It's just a little boring. It's just a little monotonous cutting that many of them, but they all fit. I think it gives it a really nice look. So the next thing, there's still some work to do on these bottom rails. Let me get this one out of the or bottom stretchers. What I'm going to do is cut a curve on the bottom of this to lighten this up on the, not only on the side ones but also on the front and back. Once you get that done, the bottom shelf needs to fit in here. The bottom shelf fits flush with this front stretcher, but there's a dado in the side stretchers, so that'll fit in there. And then it's going to have to go around this corner here, so I can either do one of 2 things. I can cut a notch in the table or in the shelf to go around it, or I can chisel this part out. So I think what I'm going to do is chisel it out so I get a nice fit there. So the next thing to do is lay out the dado and then cut the dados in there, and then cut the curves on the bottom of these pieces. Then I'll have some work to do on the top, and then make 2 drawers. So we're closing in, but there's still quite a bit of work left to do on these tables. Okay, that's the end of the first video. Let's go ahead and, if you have time, jump over to video number 2, and I'll show you how I wrap up this project. They're coming out pretty nice so far. So hopefully, knock on wood, we finish them up, which is a pretty easy thing to say because they're already done and delivered. So I know that they came out nice. So go ahead, and I'll see you over in video number 2.